Tractate Beitzah, or as it's more commonly pronounced, Tractate Beitzah, discusses laws of object usage, food preparation, and the principles of Muktzeh, all concepts discussed over by the laws of Shabbos. Now here, how they uniquely apply to holidays, which have slightly different laws than Shabbos. Here, holidays specifically apply to the holy days of biblically instituted holidays, such as the first and last days of the holidays of Passover and Sukkot, and the entire holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The laws of the intermediate days of the holiday of Sukkot and Passover are more discussed in Tractate Moed Katan. Rabbinically instituted holidays like Hanukkah and Purim, while individually important, don't have the strict similar prohibitions of Shabbos apply on their days. The first chapter discusses a number of specific topics on this subject, starting with the laws of an egg which was laid on a holiday. The first Mishnah says, an egg that was laid on a holiday, Beis Shammai would hold that it can be eaten on the holiday, while Beis Hillel would say you cannot eat it or touch it. An additional point, you obviously cannot own any leavened bread, chametz, as it's called, on the holiday of Passover, as is lengthily discussed in Tractate Beitzah. Beis Shammai says the prohibition applies to leaven itself, with the forbidden amount being the volume of an olive, and with the chametz itself, the amount is the volume of a date. Beis Hillel would hold that both volumes are of an olive. Another dispute, there's a requirement to cover the blood of an animal with dirt after slaughtering it. If an animal was slaughtered on a holiday, Beis Shammai says you can dig up dirt to cover the blood. Beis Hillel says you can only use pre-prepared dirt, but if the animal was already slaughtered, you can then dig up dirt. And it says that the ashes of the stove are considered to be prepared, which is something that we're going to explain. The Gemara discusses the case of the egg and the logic of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to why they do or do not permit the egg to be eaten. One answer is that the hen in question was designated for egg production, and the opinion that does not allow eating the egg applies a broad application of the laws of Muktzeh, which prohibits handling an object which does not have a designated use on Shabbos or holidays, and they also apply the principle of nolad, that something that only achieves their current useful state on the holiday itself, for instance an egg born on that day, is a category of Muktzeh and cannot be used. The other opinion does not agree with these two principles. This is discussed, and there's variation on which we hold like. Some say holidays are stricter on Shabbos with these laws, as holiday laws are generally a bit more lenient, so out of concern that people might take them less seriously, we actually apply stringencies here by holidays. Some disagree with this entire explanation and say that the hen in question was designated for consumption, and the holiday in question fell out the day after Shabbos, so on a Sunday, and the issue is of the fact that it was prepared on a Shabbos, the day before, as this opinion holds that an egg is formed the day before it's laid, so according to one of the opinions, it can't be eaten. And then according to this, all eggs laid on holidays or on a Shabbos would be disallowed, even if it wasn't after Shabbos or before a holiday, as a stringency out of concern for the application of this exact case. The only exception would be when you slaughtered a chicken and found the egg inside, you can eat it on a holiday, as this is a rare case where stringencies don't apply. Another possible answer, the opinion that doesn't allow the egg, it's because it resembles a fruit that falls from a tree, and if you think the egg is allowed, you'd think that fruit is also permissible, which it's not, so these laws are combined. Another fourth explanation of the logic, the egg is disallowed as it resembles the impermissible practice of drinking juice that came out of a fruit on Shabbos or a holiday, so it's disallowed, as these laws are combined. It also gives individual logics as to why each of these opinions disagreed with each other. They're discussed a bit further. All of these different opinions are brought as to how they relate by different similar cases. There are additional points. It says an opinion that a debated egg case is possibly where it's a doubt if the egg was laid on the holiday, or perhaps on the days prior, but we still are strict and don't allow it to be nullified to permissible in a mixture of eggs, as it's permissible after the holiday anyways. There's also a mentioned case of eating an egg and its shell and the mother, and it says that the permissibility of the latter options is actually just an exaggeration. There are other similar cases discussed. It also brings up some related discussions, like if firewood fell from a palm tree on Shabbos and the next day is a holiday, you can't use it then as firewood, as a stringency to emphasize that the branches on Shabbos are actually Muktzeh. A related issue, if branches fall from a tree straight into an oven on a holiday, you can add pre-prepared wood and burn them. That's not a Muktzeh issue of moving the prohibited wood, as majority of the wood here is allowed, which is the wood you're moving. Deliberately nullifying the usability of an item which is prohibited, here the bottom wood, is not an issue, as this is only a rabbinic issue, so we don't need to be as strict. There are similar topics discussed onwards. There are also sources brought for this conversation. The sources are explained a bit, and it also discusses the permissibility of eating an egg that was laid on the first day of the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, to then eat it on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, depending on when the testimony for the new moon is accepted. Some say we disallow it to be safe, it's discussed. There's some points on burying a corpse on a holiday, some say we only postpone until after, if the burial was not delayed and there's no issue of the body decaying. Others disagree. There are further points on the difference between the first and second days of holidays in regards to things like establishing an Eruv boundary and similar. There's also disagreement on an animal born in this period, and there are issues of Muktzeh. An opinion says that an egg is considered to be fully formed when it leaves the hen. There's debate as to what this applies to. We bring a number of suggestions, and it says that it's applicable by some laws of sales. The case of applicability would essentially be if somebody specifies that he wants an egg from a live hen, we presume he wants them to hatch chicks for breeding. So if the egg comes from the inside of a slaughtered chicken, which is not born normally, he would therefore be entitled to get reimbursement. A related case is discussed. Some say actually what the specificity is that if the greater part of the egg is laid, it's considered fully formed, which has relevancy if an egg is partially, majority, laid before a holiday and then goes back inside the hen and is then fully laid on a holiday. It can be eaten on the holiday because it wasn't considered laid on the holiday. Some say that it's actually considered formed only when it fully exists. There's some sources brought and discussed and points on the mating patterns of species of animals and how this relates to these laws. There's further discussion here and more points on covering the blood of an animal with dirt after slaughter. We said that the opinion which disallows digging dirt allowed it if you already slaughtered the animal. Some say that only applies if the spade was pre-inserted into the ground. It's by loose earth, so he's not crushing it, and he has no need for the hole, only the dirt within, so it's not a biblical issue. We also said that the ashes of the stove were prepared for use, which is a side point. Some say that this only applies if the ashes were burnt before the holiday, but it's allowed even if it was burnt on the holiday, if it's hot enough to roast an egg, as then it's not Muktzeh. There are some related points discussed. There's further discussion on particularities in these laws of covering animal blood. There's also a point on the forbiddenness of separating challah on a holiday. According to one opinion, you can't do it anywhere on a holiday, as a measure of sanctity applies to them, based on a proof. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you cannot carry a ladder between dovecots on a holiday, but you can adjust the ladder in a dovecot to reach a different window. Beis Hillel says you can move the ladder between dovecots. The Gemara says that this applies in a public domain. Now, unlike by Shabbos, you're allowed to carry things in a public domain on a holiday, but here the opinion disallows carrying the ladder in public out of concern that people will think you're carrying it to plaster your roof, which is not allowed. Beis Hillel says that's not a concern as the ladder is being moved against a dovecot. Both agree it's permitted to carry the ladder in a private domain, although this is disputed. Others say that the disagreement is on carrying the ladder in a private property, and the principal debate is whether we hold that we're concerned about people seeing you do something that looks like a wrongdoing, even in privacy. According to this, both would hold that the ladder is disallowed in public. There's also disagreement if you can replace the dovecot ladder. Everyone agrees that an attic ladder can't be replaced, although there's disagreement if you can adjust it to a new window or shift it over by shuffling the ladder legs. These opinions are debated further. The opinions on shoveling dirt on a slaughtered animal's blood and variation if the tool was stuck in the ground and their respective logics are further discussed. New Mishnah. You can't take a dove from a dovecot unless you predesignate the dove before the holiday. Beis Shammai says you need to physically pick up the dove and shake it before to prepare it for use, while Beis Hillel says you can just verbally designate the birds. The Gemara says that this dispute applies by the first brood of the birds, as people sometimes decide to put them back, which would be problematic, so you have to designate them. The opinions are further qualified. This brings a new Mishnah. If you designate white doves and find black ones, or vice versa, or designate 2 doves and find 3, they are not allowed. If you designate 3 and find 2 doves, it's fine. You can assume that one of the doves escaped. If you designate fledglings in a nest and the next day find the fledgling next to the nest, you have to assume those were 2 different birds, and you can't use those. You can assume those were yours if they're the only fledglings in the vicinity. The Gemara has an opinion that the cases where you designated black and white doves, and the white ones are in the place of the black doves, and the black doves are in the place of the white ones. You can't use either, as you can't just assume they switch places. It could possibly be different birds. The other cases are also qualified. There's arguments as to what the case is with the birds that are found right outside their nest. Some say you can just follow the majority by item proximity, and here the birds are majority birds of the rest of the world, so you can't assume they're yours. Others say the cases where the birds are on an actual ledge attached to the nest, so that principle wouldn't apply. So the case is that even if there are two of these ledges, one on top of the other, and you only designate the pigeons in the top nest, and then on the holiday you find no doves in the bottom nest and pigeons in the top nest, you can't use the top ones, as the doves could have left and the bottom doves could have gone into the top nest. We also said if there are no other birds in the vicinity, it's permissible, even if they went from inside the nest to the ledge. We explained that this applies even where there's another nest 50 cubits away, but it's not visible, as it's around the corner of a building, as young birds don't hop farther than where they can see their nest. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you cannot use a pestle, normally used for grinding grain to chop meat. Beis Hillel says you can. Beis Shammai says you can't place an animal hide where it'll be trampled, and you can't pick it up due to issues of Muktzeh, unless there's an amount of meat on it the size of an olive. Beis Hillel says all of this is allowed. The Gemara says that both opinions agree that if the pestle wasn't used for chopping meat, it's Muktzeh and can't be touched. Obviously, a butcher's board is permissible, which is explained. There's further discussion in regards to hides. There's agreement that you can salt meat for roasting over a hide, but not if it's for cooking, which requires a larger amount of salt. There are some miscellaneous points on salting mentioned. It also mentions methods of salting more than what you need for the holiday. Some say you can just salt a bunch of additional pieces at the same time as you salt your piece of meat. Others would salt a piece, decide they wanted a different piece, and salt that one, etc. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you cannot remove window shutters for use on holidays. Beis Hillel says you can, and you can even replace them after. The Gemara says an opinion that this is shutters of vendor stalls, which are not connected to the ground. It also says that there are three things that were allowed according to the rabbis on a holiday, out of concern that if they were forbidden, a necessary act wouldn't be done in the first place. So they allowed placing a hide where it could be trampled, so that people would prepare meat on holidays to eat, to replace window shutters on vendor stalls, so that vendors would keep their shops open on holidays, and also replacing a wound dressing on a Kohen in the temple. Some add others. This is all elaborated on further. It also discusses some specific types of window shutters with specific pivots. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you cannot carry a child, lulav, or a Torah scroll from a private to a public domain on a holiday. Beis Hillel allows this. There are some sources discussed. There's a rabbinic issue with separating teruma and ma'aser tithes from produce on holidays. Beis Shammai said we cannot deliver challah or meat gifts to a Kohen on a holiday, whether they were separated before or during. Beis Hillel allows either of these. The debate is if those gifts are comparable to the teruma and ma'aser tithes. The points on teruma and tithe delivery are discussed a bit further. There are some further points. It also gets into the method of barley kernel collection, the peeling and whatnot in regards to tithes, and how these laws apply on Shabbos. It says you may rub kernels of wheat on holidays. Some say only between your thumb and one finger, some say with your thumb and two fingers, others allow even between all your fingers. There are further points. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you can crush spices on a holiday with a wooden pestle, but pieces of salt must be crushed in an earthenware flask or with a wooden mixing spoon. Beis Hillel says you can crush spices as you normally do with a stone pestle, and salt must be crushed with a wooden pestle. The Gemara says the difference between salt and spices is that cooked dishes need salt, but not spices, or that salt doesn't start losing its flavor after being crushed. There's a practical difference between the two by either where you know before the holiday which dishes you are cooking and it was that needed spices, or if you're crushing saffron, which also doesn't lose flavor after being crushed. Some say that anything, even salt, can be crushed in its normal manner. This is discussed further, and some would say to lean the mortar on its side when crushing, and differences between a small or a large mortar. There are related incidents listed. New Mishnah. In regards to sorting on holidays, one of the forbidden forms of work on Shabbos, we said there's a possible exception by separating the food from the waste by Shabbos. Beis Shammai says that also applies here, but Beis Hillel says you can separate, however, with removing the waste from the food, either in your lap or with a funnel or a large plate, but you can't use a board or a fine or a coarse sieve. Rabban Gamliel says you can rinse the food in water and skim off any rising impurities. The Gemara says the point on using water to float out impurities only applies when there's more food than impurities. There are related cases discussed. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says that the only gifts you can send to somebody on a holiday are readied portions of food. Beis Hillel says you can even send alive or slaughtered animals, wines, oils, flowers, or otherwise. He prohibits grain, which can't be used on a holiday, but others don't. The Gemara says that Beis Hillel actually wouldn't allow sending the gifts with a large party with 3 or more people. It's unresolved if we allow 3 people with 3 different presents. The opinion that allows grain does so because he holds that there are uses for grain on holidays, like feeding your animals or similar. New Mishnah. Further, in regards to things that can be sent as gifts on a holiday, garments, whether sewn or unsewn, even if they contain kilayim, forbidden mixtures like wool and linen together, as they have holiday needs. No sending sandals with spikes due to an incident mentioned in Tractate Shabbos, page 60a, or various unusable garments like an unsewn shoe, some say an unblackened shoe. Generally, if it can be used on a holiday, it can be sent to somebody without issues. The Gemara brings a few suggestions as to the use of a garment with kilayim, forbidden mixtures, in reference to stiff clothes that can be sat on. There are related points. Eruv says the whole issue with spiked sandals. An unsewn shoe is still not allowed even if it's partially attached with pegs. There's argument by an unblackened shoe in regards to the necessity of smoothing it to complete it. Some say that the Mishnah meant at the end that something that can be used even on a holiday can be sent on a holiday, like tefillin. There's some discussion on tefillin and how to protect it while traveling if Shabbos starts, like to bring it to a nearby safe house if it's protected from thieves. But if not, if it'll only be kept safe from animals but not thieves, even if most of the thieves are Jewish people, you can't really assume that the tefillin would be safe in such a case, and you should just take them home. And that's the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Tractate Beitzah deals further with the laws of prohibitions and similar on holidays. The first Mishnah says, if a holiday falls out on a Friday, you can't cook on the holiday for Shabbos. You can cook for the holiday, and if it's leftovers, you can use those for Shabbos. There is, however, the concept of an Eruv Tavshilin, a rabbinic institution, which is essentially a food that has been prepared before the holiday and set aside for Shabbos, which is a representative action which allows us to complete food preparation on the holiday for Shabbos. Beis Shammai says it's required for that to be 2 cooked dishes, while Beis Hillel says it should be 1 cooked dish. They agree that fish cooked with egg is sufficient, as it's considered 2 cooked dishes. If this Eruv Tavshilin was eaten or lost before you finished making your food for Shabbos, it's no longer effective, and you can't cook on the holiday for Shabbos. If any of it is left intact, it still functions. The Gemara brings sources for this concept of an Eruv Tavshilin, and it has some opinions on the logic. Some say it's so that he'll properly portion his foods between the holiday and Shabbos. Others say it's to show that if you can't bake on a holiday for Shabbos, you for sure can't bake on a holiday for a weekday, as it's to preserve the holiness of the holidays. Sources for the opinions are debated at length. It also brings a side point source that your income for the year is set on the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. There are also some additional points on the importance and holiness of Shabbos, which are largely repetitions of things said in earlier tractates. In regards to the cooked dish used as an Eruv Tavshilin, some said it could not be bread, as it cannot be a common dish, or possibly because it must be something that accompanies a main dish, not a main dish itself, like bread. Pounded grain, for instance, meets both these requirements and is allowed to be used. Also, you can use the lentils at the bottom of a pot or fat scraped off a knife as long as the volume is over the size of an olive. It also says that small salted fish can be used even if they were cooked by a non-Jewish person. Fish hash, on the other hand, cooked with flour. The flour is the main ingredient, so in such a case it can't be eaten. The amount of an olive is required, and that is enough for no matter how many people. That's the minimum amount. There's no maximum amount. However, the Eruv Tavshilin does require knowledge of its establishment, although some say it's only required for the person establishing it. Everybody else included within it is fine, and the proximity of this inclusion is said to be the Shabbos Techum, a concept from Tractate Eruvin, which basically just means a square area of 2,000 cubits around. There's a related incident listed. There's discussion if you can establish an Eruv Techumin or Chatzeres, again, concepts from Tractate Eruvin, to expand the area you can walk in on Shabbos. If the establishment is on the holiday, that's the day before. After brief debate, we say you can't. There's also discussion on the proper formatting of the Amidah prayer, the Shemona Esrei, if a holiday falls out on a Shabbos. You can just open a standard prayer book to see the exact formatting that's decided on. If there's a 2-day holiday, which was something instituted, as we're not 100% certain which of 2 days a holiday is, So to be safe, we celebrate 2 days in a row, just so it's definitely covered. On both days, you can establish an Eruv Tavshilin to expand your walking boundary on Shabbos, and an Eruv Tavshilin to allow yourself to cook on the holiday for Shabbos. So that way it's definitely established on one of the correct days, that's a weekday. An Eruv Tavshilin is stricter, meaning if you allow the Eruv Tavshilin, you might not also allow the Eruv Tavshilin, because acquiring a residence on a holiday is not really allowed. Further, in regards to a 2-day holiday, you cannot cook from one day of the holiday to the next, but it says that you can cook a whole oven full of meat when you only plan on using one piece for that day. It also allows similar concepts by other cooking, not just by baking. Others say you can fill your oven full of bread when you only just needed one piece, as bread bakes better when the oven is full, which is the opinion we hold like. There's a question: in the event that you didn't make an Eruv Tavshilin, can others use your flour to bake for you, which has a practical difference if you need to transfer the ownership of your flour to others before they bake for you? We say you would have to do this as your flour is prohibited. A further point: if somebody doesn't make an Eruv Tavshilin and bakes for Shabbos anyways, that wasn't allowed. But can they eat that food? It's argued. We try to bring a number of proofs, but it goes unresolved. We also say we hold like our base Hillel that you only need one cooked dish. It is worth noting that many nowadays use 2 cooked dishes when doing this practice, just to be safe. If your Eruv Tavshilin is eaten while you're in the middle of preparing dough for Shabbos on the holiday, you can finish the baking. New Mishnah: if the holiday fell out on the Shabbos, Beis Shammai says that any necessary immersions, whether for people or utensils, must be done before. Beis Hillel says that utensils must be immersed before Shabbos, but a person can immerse himself on Shabbos. They do agree that you can make impure waters purified in a stone utensil lowered into a mikveh, but you should not immerse the water, which will explain to me not doing this in a wooden utensil. We may also immerse utensils from purpose to purpose and from group to group, which will be explained. The Gemara says an opinion that the ban on immersing utensils on Shabbos is a preventative measure so people don't accidentally carry the utensils in a public domain on Shabbos. Then, a cistern in your own courtyard still wouldn't be allowed, as that could lead people to start using a public cistern, and the concern of immersing utensils on a holiday where you're allowed to carry in a public domain is that it could lead you to carry on Shabbos also, where it's impermissible. This is all, however, argued on, and others give the explanation that you can't immerse utensils on Shabbos out of concern that you'll wring them out, which would apply to fabric utensils, and also non-fabric ones out of concern of the two being confused. It's debated further. A third opinion is that people might start pushing off immersing their utensils, delaying them until the holiday, and then they could become impure, which we bring a source for. Another explanation, it's not allowed as it's similar to the principle of making a utensil usable, which is not allowed on a holiday. A person can immerse himself, as that doesn't resemble repairing yourself from impurity, it just looks like you're cooling yourself off, which could apply in any water. There are some related discussions, and a point on sipping vinegar through your teeth, which is a repetition of a point from Tractate Shabbos. The point on immersing impure water in a stone utensil, which is allowed, or a wooden utensil, which is not, are discussed. It also says you shouldn't immerse a utensil by twilight before a holiday, as it also needs a night after for it to become purified, and twilight is questionably between day and night. Some also disallow it by twilight on a weekday, others say it's fine, as he's rushing to do it then before the deadline, meaning he knows the laws of the necessary timings. And the other opinion says it's not allowed because he could be rushing as he has work right after, so he actually doesn't properly know the laws. This is discussed. It says you can immerse from purpose to purpose on a holiday, which means something that was immersed for a purpose, like a wine press, and then immersing it before using it for a different purpose, like for an olive press. It also says you can immerse from group to group. If you were planning on eating your Paschal sacrifice with one group of people, and then decided to eat it with others, you can re-immerse your utensils on a holiday in between if you want to. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you can bring the Shalomim offering in the temple on a holiday, but you can't lean on them, which was a step of the process for certain offerings. You cannot bring Olah offerings, but Beis Hillel says you can, and you can also lean on both of these. The Gemara says that the debate on leaning is based on a verse which includes these sacrifices in regards to holidays, unlike vowed and donated offerings which cannot be brought on a holiday. There's disagreement on this. There's further debate in regards to which offerings are, can, and cannot be brought on holidays. This is debated further between many opinions. It also gets into some points on the fixed times for certain sacrifices and disagreement and other opinions in regards to the allowance of offering vowed or donated sacrifices on holidays. Sources are brought to debate if they are or are not permitted. It also has debate if you can prepare for eating on a holiday an animal which is owned partially by a Jewish person and partially by a non-Jewish person. Some say yes by an animal to slaughter it, as you can't really slaughter half of it, but by a dough offering you can just separate your portion. If part of the dough will also be given to animals, like dogs, you can eat the whole thing if you have a carcass, which you can feed to the dogs instead. It also says, if the government requires its citizens to bake them bread for the soldiers, you can bake it on a holiday if you'd be allowed to share some of the bread with your child, and each loaf is suitable for that, it'd be permissible. Otherwise not. There's a related incident brought. There's also discussion if date pits are muktzeh, which we eventually say that they are, but you can feed them to animals by putting them on bread. Some say you can put them on bread to be able to do anything with them. In regards to having non-Jewish people eat with you, it says it's allowed on Shabbos, but on a holiday there's a concern that you might end up cooking more food. Some say there's an issue with even inviting them to eat for Shabbos, as the dregs of wine at the bottom of their cup would be muktzeh and can't be moved. In the end, we do allow us to invite a non-Jewish person to eat with us on Shabbos, with no concerns of muktzeh or otherwise, but there is a stringency by holidays, as it could result in you cooking additional food on the holiday, which, as we said, is problematic. What you could do, and what some sages did when they invited non-Jewish people to their holiday meals, was to clarify beforehand that this was all the food and they weren't making any more. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you can't heat water on a holiday to wash yourself unless the water is fit for drinking. Beis Hillel allows it. You can make a bonfire to warm yourself. The Gemara clarifies that the only person who allows the bonfire is Beis Hillel. New Mishnah. There were 3 times that the sage Rabban Gamliel ruled strictly like Beis Shammai, by not insulating hot water on a holiday, no straightening a candlestick on a holiday, and no baking thick loaves of bread on a holiday, only wafers. Others said that the last one, by bread, was a stringency just his household kept, everybody else can make thick bread. The Gemara debates if the issue of insulation is where he established an Eruv Tavshilin. Some say no, and others say an amount is allowed, the bare minimum necessary for his sustenance. Some say the issue of food insulation on the holiday is that it's clearly being done for Shabbos. Others disagree and say the case discussed is where he made an Eruv for cooking, but not for insulating. The issue of straining a candlestick is where it's a candlestick made of parts, so assembling them looks like the forbidden practice of building on holidays and Shabbos. The debate is if building applies to utensils or not. There are similar points, such as some say you're allowed to trim a wick on a holiday and similar. You can extinguish a fire on a holiday to save lives, but there's debate if you can do it to stop financial loss, and similar points discussed, also on the permissibility of eye medication on a holiday. As for the point on the permissibility of baking thick bread, it gives dimensions as to what makes a bread considered thick, and the issue is that Beis Shammai held you're expending unnecessary effort, and his opinion would apply by all holidays. New Mishnah. Rabban Gamliel ruled leniently about 3 things. You can sweep your dining room, you can put incense on coals on holidays, and on the holiday of Passover, you can roast the whole paschal offering, a kid, along with his entrails. The rabbis prohibited these 3. The Gemara says that everybody agrees that using incense for fragrance of a room is allowed. The debate is by perfuming a garment. Others disagree. There's also debate about smoking fruits on holidays or spices on coals and similar. Additional points are discussed along with the allowance of the paschal sacrifice. New Mishnah. The sage Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah allowed 3 things which the rabbis prohibited. He allowed his cow to go out in public with a strap on its horns, he would comb his animals with a metal comb, and he would grind peppercorns with a grinder. Some didn't allow the metal comb, as it could make a wound, but allowed a wooden comb. The rabbis allowed neither. The Gemara explains that it wasn't actually this sage's cow, it was his neighbor's, but since he didn't protest against the actions with it, it was considered to be his. The act of cow combing is described, and the debate as to which tools can be used. New Mishnah. A pepper grinder can contract impurity as a receptacle vessel, a metal utensil, or a sieve. The Gemara says the bottom is a receptacle, the middle is a sieve, and the top is an upper utensil. New Mishnah. A child's toy wagon is susceptible to a type of impurity called midras tumah. It can be moved on Shabbos, but only over clothing, not on a dirt floor. Also, no utensils can be dragged on the ground, as they'll plow furrows in the ground, which is the malacha work of plowing. Besides for wagons, which don't make furrows, they just press down. The Gemara explains the points on impurity, because the child leans on the wagon, and the wagon can be moved, because it's considered like a utensil, so it isn't muktzeh, and there's disagreement about the issue of plowing and making furrows, as it's unintended by a wagon. And that's the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Tractate Beitzah continues discussing the laws of what is and isn't permissible on holidays. The first Mishnah says, in regards to the labor of trapping animals, which is forbidden on Shabbos and holidays, on a holiday you cannot catch fish from a pond, nor can you feed them, but you can catch an animal that's already trapped in an enclosure, and you can feed them. Some say it depends on the type of enclosure. If it can be trapped further, it's not allowed to grab. If it's fully trapped, you can. The Gemara cites some dissenting opinions in regards to trapping birds, but suggests that where it's allowed could be where it's talking about taking it in a roofed enclosure, or it says it's considered trapped in a closet, and it's speaking about a specific species of bird which can't really be domesticated, so it's not considered trapped even if it's driven into a closet. Anyways, that source is talking about a large enclosure, while our Mishnah is talking about a small one. A small enclosure is defined as where you can grab the animal in one lunge inside, or it's where there are not many corners for it to escape to, or it's where the shadows of the walls reach each other, depending on your opinion. It says we follow the opinion that only allows you to grab animals in enclosures where they're considered trapped. An animal that requires trapping is defined as an animal which you bring a trap to catch it, besides for geese and chickens which return to their coop in the evenings, and their subsistence depends on you. So they are already considered trapped. Some say those birds are exceptions, as they don't try to escape their coop, unlike by doves, which do. New Mishnah. If a trap for an animal was set before a holiday, you can't take an animal from the trap on the holiday, unless you knew about it before the holiday. There's also an incident mentioned where this guy gave fish to Rabban Gamliel on a holiday, and he said it would have been permissible to accept it. He personally just didn't accept it here because he just didn't really like the guy. The Gemara discusses some related points. This is discussed. It also says that the fish, in this case, some said it could be accepted, some said it could be eaten. There are related points. There are other cases. If you plug your canal before a holiday, and on the holiday you find fish in the canal, they're permitted. Which also means that if a wild animal went into your orchard and gave birth there before the holiday, you can use it on the holiday itself. The last point is actually disputed as to whether the newborn required designation or otherwise. New Mishnah, you may not slaughter a dangerously ill animal on a holiday unless there's enough time left in the day to eat a roasted olive-sized piece of its meat. Some say even if there's time to eat a raw olive-sized piece of meat after it's slaughtered. If you slaughter it in a field, you may not bring it to your house via pole or litter, but you can carry it in piece by piece. The Gemara gets into some practices of the preparation of certain animals for certain offerings in the temple, such as that they should be skinned and dismembered prior to you eating from them. It's explained that this is proper manners, that you shouldn't rush to eat food like a glutton. You should wait until it's properly prepared. There are similar points, and it says that there are three who are strong: the Jewish people among the nations, the dog among the animals, and the chicken amongst the fowl. Some add the goat amongst the smaller animals, and the caper bush amongst the trees. Beyond not carrying animal parts on poles or litters, there's points on a person not being carried in such a manner on a holiday, and unique times it's permitted to carry a person on your shoulders, such as when there's a public need. New Mishnah. If a firstborn animal fell into a pit on a holiday, an expert can go in and examine it. If it's found to have a permanent blemish, it can be brought up to be slaughtered. Elsewise, no. Some say that even if you find the blemish, if it's found on the holiday, it can't be slaughtered on the holiday, as it's not considered to be prepared. The Gemara says the dispute is about the allowability of having an expert examine animal blemishes on a holiday, but it brought the case of a pit to show that according to the opinion that says you can't remove it, you can't use an expert to remove it as a trick to get the animal out of the pit, even though it's in pain. It discusses how the unique wording of the Mishnah fits like this. There are similar cases discussed, and some say if a firstborn animal was born with a permanent blemish, it can be examined on a holiday, but others disagree. There's also discussion on if something in general, by the laws of Muktzeh, was fit to be used and then became unfit on Shabbos, and then became fit for use. Some say that once an item becomes Muktzeh, it's Muktzeh for the rest of Shabbos. Others say otherwise. It's a debated topic. There's further debate on who we follow in regards to being allowed to examine a firstborn animal on a holiday. There are further proofs brought, along with the related incident. New Mishnah. If an animal died on a holiday, you cannot move it. Once Rabbi Tavshilin asked if this was permissible, and also about challah that became impure, and the rabbi said that they couldn't be moved. The Gemara says that some say that the prohibition against moving the animal, as its muktzeh, applies to consecrated animals, and we bring sources. New Mishnah. Before refrigerators were invented, people wouldn't slaughter an animal until they had a group of people that had committed to purchasing most of the cuts of the animal's meat. So, people cannot be counted into such a group on a holiday, but they can be counted prior to the holiday, or they can just slaughter the animal and portion it there on the holiday. The Gemara says that some say the prohibition of forming these groups forbids initially fixing a price to an animal on a holiday. In the event that they decide to slaughter the animal and portion it right there on the holiday, you would take a similar animal for comparison, and after the holiday, the value and measurements would be assessed using that one. New Mishnah. Some say on a holiday you can weigh meat on a balance against a utensil or cleaver. Others say you can't use a scale. The Gemara says the opinion that disallows using the scale on a holiday, that would even disallow storing the meat on a scale for safety, as long as the scale is actually set up on its ring. Some say a professional butcher can't weigh meat in his hand or in water on a holiday. It also says you can't make a handle in the piece of meat on a holiday. That was something that was done so that way the customer could carry the meat home. But some say you can make the hole by hand. You also can mark your meat on a holiday by cutting it into a custom shape, for instance. There's further discussion on using scales on a holiday as to which opinion we hold like. New Mishnah. No sharpening a knife on a holiday, but you can scrape it against another knife. The Gemara qualifies, using a whetstone is not allowed. You can only use it to remove the grease, but you can use a wooden sharpening board to sharpen the knife. Other variations disagree with this. This opinion is in dispute with the opinion that permits preliminaries for food preparation on holidays. There are further discussion on sharpening knives, and it says you cannot straighten out a bent spit, even by hand. There's also argument if a spit that was used to roast meat on a holiday can be handled. Some say you can, even when there's no meat on it, as it's a hazard, so it must be moved out of the way. There are further points. New Mishnah, you cannot tell a butcher to weigh you a certain amount of meat, but you can slaughter and divide the meat between people. The Gemara gives a list of the different terminologies depending on your location of different meat weights. New Mishnah, you can ask someone to fill a vessel for you on a holiday as long as you don't specify a measure. You can't use a measuring cup. Some would measure their goods prior to the holiday and sell them like that, and others said that's a good practice always to pre-measure, so that way it settles and gives you a more accurate measurement. The Gemara says that some disallow a measuring cup for all opinions, and the second opinion would even disallow a vessel that can be used to measure. Some say it means you can't verbally specify a measurement, and the second opinion says you can't use a measuring cup. This is debated on. It also says that the individual who would pre-measure his goods before holidays did so because he wanted to spend more time in the study hall on the holiday. It describes how he did this and related points. There's disagreement if you can sift flour a second time on a holiday, but everyone says it's allowed if like a rock fell inside or something. There are related instances brought. New Mishnah, you're allowed to go to a store that you're accustomed to going and asking for a specific number of eggs or nuts, and that's how people typically talk in regards to these produce, even outside of commercial transactions. The Gemara says a number of similar instances, and says that this is allowed as typically people set a measurement, not an amount of produce. So this is allowed as long as you don't mention the sum of money you're spending. And that's the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Tractate Beitzah further goes through the laws of prohibitions and Muktzeh on holidays. The first Mishnah says, on a holiday, if you're carrying jugs around, you can't carry a large number of them in a basket or a tub as you typically do, as it's viewed as disrespectful to the holiday. You can carry one or two on your shoulders or in front of you. Similarly, if you're carrying a tub of straw on a holiday, you should have it in front of you, as a different manner of doing things. Even if you didn't designate the straw before the holiday, you can take from it, but not so from a woodshed. The Gemara clarifies, if you can't carry something in a deviated manner from the rest of the week, you can just carry it in the normal way. If something is normally carried on your shoulders on the holiday, you'd carry it in a pitchfork. If it's normally carried with a pitchfork, you could carry it on a pole, resting on the shoulders of two people. If it's normally carried like that, carry it on a handheld pole. If it's normally carried like that, then you should cover the item with a kerchief, and if you can't do that, just carry it in the normal manner. Generally, basically, you just make a deviation, but women filling up water from a river should do it so normally, because if they used smaller buckets, they'll end up walking more, and if they used a larger bucket, it'll be a larger load. And they can't put a lid on, as then they might tie it, which is not allowed. And they can't put a kerchief over the bucket, as it could get soaked and they'll squeeze it out, which is also impermissible on a holiday. There are related points on not rebuking people for violating biblical law if we know they won't listen. It says the point on taking straw or wood is like Reb Shimon, who holds a more lenient view on Muktzeh. So straw is allowed, but the wood is not, as it's types of cedar wood, which are Muktzeh for monetary loss. Others say the inverse, that it's like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds a broader, more strict view of Muktzeh, but he allows the straw as it's decayed straw with thorns in it, so it can't even be used for cement. New Mishnah, you cannot detach wood from a hut on a holiday besides for that which adjoins it. The Gemara explains that removing wood would be demolishing a structure, which is not allowed on Shabbos or holidays. The adjoining wood that we said you could take off, some said that's where it's part of the walls or the roof if it was tied in bundles, so they're only there for storage and can be removed. There's debate if it's permissible to remove wood by a sukkah on sukkahs. Some say only if you stipulated you were going to use the wood beforehand, others say you can use it. Some clarify this is only if the sukkah collapsed on the holiday. There's further discussion on this on sukkahs and the esrog. New Mishnah. On the holidays, we can bring wood from a field from a pre-gathered wood pile. You cannot bring it from an enclosure, even from wood that's scattered about. What's defined as an enclosure is debated. Some say if it's near the town, others say if you need to enter with a key, even if it's within the Shabbos Tavshilin boundary. The Gemara says that others disagree, saying you can only bring gathered wood in from an enclosure. Also, leaves of reeds or vines, if they're gathered, you still can't bring them in on a holiday, as if wind would blow, they would scatter, so they're considered to be scattered. The only way they're not muktzeh is if you put a utensil on them to hold them down before the holiday started. The Gemara explains that if the enclosure is near the town, but unlocked, we're lenient, and if it's away from town, we're lenient, which is the opinion we hold like. New Mishnah. No chopping wood on a holiday, not from a beam, not if the beam broke on the holiday. No chopping wood with an axe, saw, sickle, or otherwise, but you can use a cleaver. The Gemara clarifies that you can use a cleaver on a beam that broke before the holiday. The issue normally is one of muktzeh. Some say that the wide end of an axe blade is not allowed, but you can use the narrow end. Others say that this actually applies to the cleaver, that you can only use its narrow end. These statements are explained. New Mishnah. If a room was filled with produce and sealed before a holiday and was then breached on the holiday, you can take produce from the breach. Others say you can even breach the wall yourself and then take produce. The Gemara clarifies that this is a wall made of a pile of bricks, which can be used on a holiday, although not on Shabbos, as if there's piled bricks, they're being used for future construction and are muktzeh. Related concepts of demolishing are discussed. There are things like an opinion that you can't cut ropes on Shabbos, but it's allowed on a holiday, and you can't use undamaged utensils for firewood at all. New Mishnah. No hollowing out a lamp on a holiday, as that makes a vessel. You also can't make charcoal or cut a wick in two, but some say you can cut it with a flame. The Gemara says the source for the point on lamps. It was said by Rabbi Meir, and a small lamp can't be used as it's a utensil, which could be used to hold coins, which is discussed further. It also says no making charcoal for a bathhouse, as there's a rabbinic issue with using a sweat room. No using a knife to separate two wicks, but you can cut the wick in half with a candle, as long as the wick's two ends are in a lamp, so it appears as if you're just lighting a candle. You can trim a wick on a holiday to remove the charcoal residue at the top, which messes up the illumination. Some other rulings of a wick on a holiday, you can't twist one or singe it with a flame or cut it in two, but it is allowed to press it together by hand, soak it in oil, or cut it in half with a flame when it's in two lamps, as mentioned. There are some other points mentioned about the importance of giving charity and similar. New Mishnah. You cannot break a shard or cut a piece of paper to roast a salted fish on it. You cannot shovel out an oven or a double stove, but you can press down on the ashes inside to level them. You cannot position two barrels next to each other and put a pot on them, and you cannot support a pot with a piece of firewood or a door. There's disagreement if you can drive an animal with a stick on a holiday. The Gemara says the issue with breaking a shard or cutting the paper to cook a fish on it is that you're perfecting a utensil, which is not allowed on a holiday. There are other related points discussed. Unlike by positioning barrels, you can align stones of an outhouse next to each other on a holiday, as the issue with a temporary structure is rabbinic, which can be overrode by an outhouse for the sake of dignity. You cannot stack logs from the bottom up, but you can do it from the top down by holding the top ones in place. This also applies to eggs, a pot, a bed, and barrels. We clarify that you can't support a pot or a door with firewood. The issue with driving an animal is that it looks like you're traveling with it to the market. There's argument about using a dry pointed branch as a spit, which we say is allowed, just not a moist one. Some also say on a holiday, you can't take wood from a woodshed to be used as a poker, and you can't kindle with a designated poker that broke, as you can't use a broken vessel. We bring a source to show that this opinion holds like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion of a stricter, broad application of Muktzeh. New Mishnah. An opinion says you can use a sliver of wood that's before you as a toothpick on a holiday, and you can gather slivers of wood from your courtyard to kindle, as if it's in your courtyard it's considered to be prepared. Others say you can only kindle with wood that's in your house. No making fire on a holiday, not from wood, stones, earth, tiles, with water when used as a magnifying glass, and you cannot heat tiles to roast on them. The Gemara says that the prohibition of perfecting a vessel doesn't apply to things that could be used as food for animals. The other points are also expounded on and discussed. Kindling fire from one candle to another is allowed on holidays for food preparation. The issue with igniting a fire is because you're creating it. Heating tiles is problematic by new tiles, some say because they're untested and can break, some say because it hardens them, which is not allowed. Related points are discussed along with some other miscellaneous forbidden things on holidays. New Mishnah. You can stand next to Muktzeh food on Friday during a sabbatical year and declare that you'll eat from it tomorrow. Others say you're also required to mark off the portion. The Gemara further explains these points. There are related points on laws of purity and Muktzeh food and also how they relate to certain types of tithes. The remaining points on the necessity to tie these particular produce are clarified, and that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Tractate Beitzah further expands on the laws of holidays. The first Mishnah says you can lower produce through a skylight on a holiday, but not on Shabbos. You can cover produce or pitchers of wine or oil with cloths to protect against dripping rainwater. You can put a vessel under leaking water in a house on Shabbos. The Gemara debates the exact definition and usage of certain words in the Mishnah in regards to what means to lower. There's discussion as to how much produce can be lowered through such a skylight based off a different case from Tractate Shabbos, perhaps 4 or 5 boxes. There's also a question if you can transfer just through the skylight but not also across roofs, and if that similarly applies to Shabbos, as by Shabbos people would possibly be more stringent as the laws are stricter, or perhaps less so, as there's no concern of losing produce. There's also a question if you can lower the produce using windows or with ladders. It also goes through circumstance of being allowed to cover certain things, which is discussed along with the usability of beehives and honeycomb. Related points are discussed further. New Mishnah. Anything that you're obligated not to do on Shabbos, even if it's a mitzvah, you're also obligated to not do on a holiday. Rabbinically, you cannot climb a tree, ride an animal, swim in water, clap your hands, slap your thighs, or dance. You cannot do certain non-mandatory mitzvahs, no adjudication court, no betrothing or doing chalitza or yibum, parts of the love-right marriage. Full mitzvahs that are prohibited on these days are consecrating things, making assessment vows, making something cherem, set aside for temple use, or separating teruma or tithes. These both apply to Shabbos and the holidays. In fact, the only real difference between the laws of holidays and Shabbos is in regards to laws of food preparation. The Gemara explains, climbing a tree is not allowed out of concern that you'll tear something off, which is an issue of reaping. Riding an animal is not allowed out of concern that you'll leave your techum boundary, or possibly because you'll cut a branch off a tree to use as a whip. No swimming, as you might construct a swimmer's tube by weaving reeds, which is not allowed. The issues with clapping and dancing and whatnot is that it could result in you repairing a musical instrument. The mitzvahs listed, which were non-mandatory, are because he betrothed a second wife, and it's a younger brother doing yibum in those cases. And the concern by all of those is that you'll wind up writing. The full mitzvahs that were disallowed was because they are similar to commerce. No separating tithes for Kohanim applies to separating the tithes to give them on that day. This doesn't apply if the produce became tevel, unconsecrated, on that day, and the remaining points are for the qualified. New Mishnah. In regards to the laws of the techum boundary, which are spoken about more by Tractate Eruv, people and objects have a techum, a 2,000 cubit limit that you cannot walk outside of on Shabbos and holidays. If you have 2 cities' techum, and their techums overlap, people and items can go into the overlap, but somebody from the first city cannot take things from the second city from the overlap into his city's techum. Livestock and utensils have their techum boundary go according to their owner. If you entrust your animal to somebody else, its techum goes according to theirs. If many people own a utensil, its techum is limited to an area common to all of them. If you borrow a utensil, if it was before the holiday, its techum is the same as yours. If you borrowed it on the holiday, it goes according to the lender. If you borrow cooking things like water and salt, it goes only between your overlap techum. Some exempt water from this. The Gemara disputes who exactly we hold like by this. It also discusses a garment being shared by 2 people to be used on different times of the holiday. It can only be within their shared techum area. If there is no overlap between their techums with the garment right in the middle, it can't be moved at all. Some people say if 2 people bought and divided wine and meat before the holiday, the wine can be brought to their respective techums, but the animal can only be within their shared techum. Others even allow the animal to go through, depending on what your logic is. It's debated in regards to the principle of berera, meaning retroactive clarification, and how it applies here. It's discussed further. Some say that we hold like the opinion that those laws don't apply to biblical laws, but they do by rabbinic laws, like the Eruv Techumen. Some say that the ox of a fattener goes according to the individual who purchased it, while the ox of a shepherd goes according to the residents of that city. The remaining points are further discussed. We said that the techum by water and salt is limited. We try to offer an answer that the water and salt don't become nullified. It's that their ownership was established before the holiday, but that's rejected. Some say the issue is that they might come to make a partnership, so this is a preventative measure. Others say that these are added for taste, so they don't become nullified into the mixture. Others say it's not nullified because it becomes permitted. We said water is an exception, and others add specific types of salt. The water is only considered nullified and no longer discernible by thick food, where it's been absorbed. New Mishnah. A burning coal has a techum, like its owner, but a flame can be transported anywhere, as it's a non-tangible object. If a coal is consecrated property, it's possible to misuse it for private purposes, called me'ilah. This is not possible by a flame. The same applies on Shabbos. You can't carry a burning coal to a public domain on Shabbos, but you're exempt if you carry a flame, again, as it's non-tangible. The Gemara lists some other distinctions between the two. There's no decree against using the flame from an idol, because obviously no one's going near that one anyways. There are further discussed. The way you would carry a flame between domains is by holding it right by the edge between domains and waving it so it passes over. New Mishnah. Water drawn from a water hole has a techum, like the person who drew it. Water from a water hole that belongs to a city has a techum like the city. Water from water holes from those traveling from Babylonia to Israel on the holiday festivals have a techum like those who drew the water. The Gemara clarifies that our Mishnah refers to collected water. There's disagreement if you draw water from one of the wells on the way from Babylonia to Israel and give it to your friend. Some say it retains your techum, others say it switches to your friends, based on if you hold that those water holes are ownerless or owned by every Jewish person. This is debated. New Mishnah. If your produce is in another town and the people of that town establishes an Eruv Techumen, a process which extends your Eruv, again, please see Tractate Beitzah for more details, they cannot use that to bring you your produce. But if you made the Eruv, the produce is going like its owner, so you can go get it. If you invited guests from that town, they can't bring your produce with them, unless you had transferred some of its ownership to them before the holiday. The Gemara debates, if you deposit your produce by somebody, as to if its techum is by the depositor or the depositee, which has basis by the laws of liability to be discussed in a later tractate of Bava Kama. Some say that these discussions are not correlated. The topic is debated, along with some related incidents about hanging meat and whose techum it accords by. New Mishnah. You cannot draw water or slaughter range animals on a holiday. They are considered to be Muktzeh, but you may do this with domesticated animals. Domesticated animals are those that pass the night in the town. Range animals are those that pass the night in the pasture. The Gemara discusses watering your animals and then slaughtering your animals, just to inform you to water your animals before slaughter, so that way they're easier to skin after. Some have a different definition for range or domestic animals, saying it depends on where and when they pasture. One Rebbe says that range animals are those that graze in pastures and don't return to settlements in the summer or winter, and he would not hold a strict broad application of the laws of Muktzeh, unlike the other opinion, who says they disagree by animals which graze by Passover time and return by the first rains. Rebbe says that those are domesticated, while the other opinion says that those are range animals. And that's the end of chapter 5 and the entire Tractate Beitzah. Alright, that was a lot of information. So here's a rough summary of a lot of the practical takeaways from this tractate. Holidays are holy days of rest, in many ways similar to Shabbos. A holiday, a Yom Tov, here refers to one of biblical institution, meaning the holidays of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuos, and excluding rabbinically instituted holidays such as Hanukkah and Purim. The holidays of Sukkot and Passover are both over a week long, and the actual holiday parts of the holiday are the first and last 2 days. The days in between are intermediate days, and while also having the obligations of the general holiday, they don't have the same strict prohibitions and laws as Shabbos. On these holidays, nearly every single prohibition that applies on Shabbos applies here also. The only main exceptions are in regards to laws of food preparation and carrying things in a public domain, which is permissible on a holiday. If you want to prepare food from a Friday holiday to a Shabbos, this is permissible through an Eruv Tavshilin. Typically, you cannot prepare food for a following day on a holiday. However, if the following day is a Shabbos, it's permissible to create an Eruv Tavshilin, which is essentially 2 cooked foods prepared prior and set aside, which are representative of the fact that you're designating yourself permissibility to prepare food for the Shabbos. A blessing is also said on this ceremony. And that's about everything. Thank you so much for watching.